One of my favorite painters, Paul Cezanne, has an interesting and notable place in the progression of art leading to the road of Picasso, who is inexplicably one of the most notarized and well-known painters that we refer back to when we think of modern art. Cezanne had a powerful influence on how Picasso painted and how he came to be, but to fully understand Cezanne, it's important to touch base on the bridge that moves from Cezanne to Picasso. But what happens before Cezanne? Who are Cezanne's mentors and teachers? Understanding who they are provides insight into understanding how progression of art changed during the late 20th and early 20th century. So going back from Cezanne, we're going to read this. This is straight from Google Arts and Culture, one of my favorite websites for evaluating art. Cezanne was a French artist and a post-impressionist painter whose work laid the foundations of the transition from the 19th century conception of artistic endeavor, which was highly romanticized, very beautiful, idealized forms, and he helped transition from that period to a new and radically different world of art in the 20th century. Cezanne is said to have formed the bridge between late 19th century and early 20th century and its new line of artistic inquiry, cubism, which, as we talked about earlier with Picasso, was a major transition of how art could depict our lives. Cezanne's often repetitive, exploratory brushstrokes are highly characteristic and clearly recognizable. He used the panes of color and small brushstrokes that build up to form complex fields. The paintings convey Cezanne's intense study of his subjects. Both Matisse and Picasso are said to have remarked that Cezanne is the father of us all. So if Cezanne is the father to Matisse and Picasso, who were Cezanne's fathers? Who were his mentors? So if we go one stage back, one of Cezanne's most beloved mentors and educators in the art field, and most likely in life as well, was Camille Pissarro. He was a Danish-French impressionist, neo-impressionist painter, born on the island of St. Thomas. His importance resides in his contributions to both Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Pissarro studied from great forerunners, including Gustave Courbet and Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. He later studied and worked alongside Georges Seurat and Paul Signac. When he took on the neo-impressionist style at the age of 54, so Pissarro spent most of his artistic career painting in an impressionist and even in a romanticized style, but towards the end of his life, he was able to start breaking into the form and the method of painting in neo-impressionist. And as we can see on this painting up above, this would be considered neo-impressionist right here, which is colors that are seen by the naive eye. And the best way to describe what a naive eye is when you first open your eyes. If you close your eyes while you're sitting out in nature or wherever it might be, and you open them, the first batches of light that come through and that you see is what neo-impressionists and impressionists attempt to cover and attempt to convey. So in 1873, he helped establish a collective society of 15 aspiring artists, becoming the pivotal figure in holding the group together and encouraging the other members. Art historian John Rowald called Pissarro the dean of the impressionist painters, not only because he was the oldest of the group, but also by his virtue of his wisdom and his balanced, kind, warm-hearted personality. Paul Cezanne said he was the father for me a man to consult, and a little like the good Lord. And he was also one of Paul Gauguin's masters. Pierre-Auguste Renoir referred to his work as revolutionary, though through his artistic portrayals of the common man, as Pissarro insisted on painting individuals in natural setting without artifice or grandeur. So Pissarro helped bridge that connection from the previous art styles of the 19th century. We should go one layer deeper. Let's find out who was it that Pissarro looked to help make that jump from romanticized paintings of the 19th century to the late 19th and early 20th. And that would be none other than Gustave Courbet. And of course, there are other artists that contributed to Camille Pissarro's growth, but Courbet was a French painter who led the realism movement in the 19th century French painting. So he was right in the trenches of developing and seeing all of the different methods that realism and romanticism would have on portraying form and portraying the world around us. He committed to painting only what he could see and rejected academic convention and the romanticism of the previous generation of visual artists. So he wanted to expand the idea that painting needed to be this wonderful, beautiful, highly idealized image, and find out what else we could do with painting. What else can we do with depicting the world around us? His independence set an example that was important to later artists, such as the impressionists and the cubists. Courbet occupies an important place in 19th century French painting as an innovator and as an artist willing to make bold social statements through his work. And some of those social statements got him in trouble in the later parts of his lives. His paintings of the late 1840s and early 1850s brought him his first recognition. They challenged convention by depicting unidealized peasants and workers, often on a grand scale traditionally reserved for paintings of religious or historical subjects. Courbet's subsequent paintings were mostly of a less overtly political character: landscapes, seascapes, hunting scenes, nudes, and still lifes. An active socialist, Courbet was active in the political developments of France. He was imprisoned for 6 months in 1871 for his involvement with the Paris Commune, and then lived as he was exiled to Switzerland from 1873 until his death, which was 4 years later. Courbet's paintings, you'll notice, have that wide range of still touching back on some of the early romanticism ideas, but you can start to see his depiction, in this case, of a rushing fall coming out of a cave and stonework, all in deep, warm tones. This step away from realism was monumentous for most of the art world and was most likely controversial as well too. If we go back to some of his early works, he still has a large focus on realism. However, much of the scenery around his subjects is still quite idealized or quite simplified, right? This is not if we zoomed in on this stone, it's a little bit more difficult to tell what the stone is. If this was realism, we could be able to easily identify it. It only becomes realized as a stone in the context of the rest of the painting. When we look around, the fur is beautiful on this fox. Fox has a squirrel or a mouse of some sort. But we can start to see some of this taking form, and if we go forward, he still did depictions of realism on occasion, as many artists do learn early on to begin with painting realistically. His style begins to branch into a more simplified, a little more capturing of what impressionists would eventually come to call the naive eye. Beautiful depictions, warm, neutral tones, set on a beach, moody, beautiful work. So going back forward to Pissarro, there's a huge leap that Pissarro takes in depicting landscapes in a less realistic way. However, we can start to see a lot more of the impressionist style painting. Here's another one of Pissarro's works. Depicting less of the idealized life and showing more of what peasants' life might be. Here we have very, very stylized depiction of the countryside and a figure walking through the woods. Coming back to Cezanne, making the leap from Camille to Cezanne is significant. And one of the reasons why I love Cezanne, as we mentioned earlier, is his exploratory use of brushwork. When I paint, I find it incredibly freeing to paint in this style. I know how to paint realistically, but the activity of painting with an exploratory approach for me is much more like an adventure versus a study. And I respect both methods, but for me, this is much more fun. So from here, I'd like to attempt painting a landscape in the same way that Cezanne would have painted a landscape. I'm going to start a little more realistic, and then once we've reached a midpoint between realism and neo-impressionism, as Cezanne has been given the label, we will take the painting and add more of Cezanne's effects to the painting. So let's go ahead and jump in. Here's another one of Cezanne's works. We're going to use this as reference for our painting. So we'll notice that a lot of the lines that we talked about with Cezanne, the exploratory brushwork, are here in this painting. We can see there's plenty of outline, and he's using, instead of a straight black, he's using a lot of blue. And it has the effect on the painting that impressionists would like to capture, which is that naive eye, that first vision we'd see when we first look at something. This is the painting in its entirety. I think it's very beautiful. I find these paintings to be much more endearing and much more in line with the way that I like to paint right now. Won't always be that like that, I would imagine, but right now this is, for me, I want a lot of fun. I want a lot of adventure when I'm doing a painting. I don't want to spend all of my time on a piece of artwork trying to find the exact depiction of something. I'd rather have it be something that heightens what I'm currently looking at. So if we look here, we can see that what I'm talking about on those outlines, they're highly pronounced on the figures that are closest to us. So this tea kettle right here, the lines are very strong, very bold, but it's not a dark color. It's a really midline saturated blue. And these pieces of the composition help bring a focal point to the very front main subjects. And as we notice here on this picture as well, those really deep, saturated and bold lines, those are all there as well too. So let's see, what else do we have here? We've got the mug, we've got small indications of reflections on the picture, letting us know that it is metallic to some form, but it's not completely there. And if we notice here on the back side too, we can't really make out exactly what it is in the background. However, it still adds to the composition. And we can tell that it's in the distance. We can tell there's depth just because the depiction of the oranges front and center to us are so much more so much more brought forth with the colors and the saturation. Everything in the background has got much more of the subdued green colors. So we're going to hang on to this, and we're going to go ahead and start working in Photoshop. I know this is not traditional painting. I know it's not the exact format that I'd like to share and show. I know there's a lot of people that don't have access to Photoshop, but everything that I'm going to be doing here in Photoshop can be used when you're painting. So I'll make sure to talk about what I'm doing and how you would do that with traditional paints. Ideally, you'd be using oils. Oils are the most forgiving, I find, for producing artwork, especially as a beginner, but acrylics are much more readily available for a lot of people and require a lot less knowledge, so acrylics are fine too. Even Bob Ross will point out that oils are a favorite of his, but I understand that most people will have at some point in time purchased a set of acrylics and like that you can water them down, like that you basically only have that other set of tools, just water and brushes, versus with oils there's glazing, there's thinners, you've got the mineral spirits that you can add in there. It's a little more complex to get into, but once you get into the first parts of oils, you'll realize they're actually that little bit of effort that you put up front is going to give you much more freedom as you move through the painting. So here we are, starting with a nice subdued, neutral, high key tone. We're going to go in here real fast and see if we can find an image off of one of my favorite websites to find reference material. This is Pexels, PEXELS.com. Lots of wonderful royalty-free images that artists and photographers will post their work on, and in hopes that they gather a little more of the attention that they're trying to get as an artist, trying to establish yourself. Oh, here we go. This would make an excellent Cezanne painting. So we're going to screenshot this, hang on to this. Please note the artist on there. Make certain that Eberhard Grossgasteiger, probably not the perfect pronunciation, but this is who we're using. Thank you, Eberhard. Thank you. Posting all your work. He's got a lot of beautiful landscapes that he's posted to Pexels. All that would make excellent reference material for paintings. So here we are. I'm working on two different screens here, so I can see this on my secondary screen, and we'll refer back to it as we paint. But at this point, what I want to do is outline the basic composition of the landscape itself. And I'm going to take creative license. I'm not going to make this completely one-to-one depiction of the original photograph. I'm blocking in the basic shapes. Now I want to add in a little bit of the sky. Let's create a second layer here. One of the benefits of using Photoshop is we can get things on secondary layers and be able to work over the top of other layers or work underneath a layer without interfering with one of the other layers. So we got the basic background in. We're putting in some of the foreground here. This will be important for us to realize how much of the midground we want to paint in, the mountains and the distant valley. Get a little bit of the clouds blocked in. What is our basic cloud composition going to look like? Something like this. Let's block out. I always like to work from the very, very back, working to the front. There's an advantage to this. So if I work on the back side of the painting first and then eventually transition to the front, I can overlap my elements of the painting to the background and have a much more realistic feel. So I've got a neutral blue that I laid down first. I'm adding in a little more saturation. I'm bringing in more color. Remember, saturation means more color, less gray. And neutral colors are the opposite of saturated. So leaving a little tiny bit of those neutral colors, always starting neutral on the background here, and then I'll block in more saturated colors or even higher key values. So colors that are lighter, colors that are essentially adding more white to your paint. We'll leave some of that neutral on the backside. Clouds benefit when you're painting with clouds from having a neutral background, because you'll want to leave some of that neutralish, kind of grayish. Next time you're out looking at clouds, take note that the edges of clouds, a lot of the times, not every time, but a lot of the times, will have slight grayish, neutralish colors around the edges. I'm blocking out the rest of the whites here, trying to figure out where the form of the cloud's going to be. Adding the lighter color of the neutral provides form, so not only does it show us the distance, but it also helps us get form. I'm ready to start working on the mountains. I'm going to start blocking in some of these dark neutral colors. So much of what we see in mountains, we've got nice dark outlines, even though they're so far off in the distance. I still like to start with a really dark color and use that as the underpainting instead of at the end painting over the top with dark. It's nice to have that behind. For whatever reason, when you paint lighter colors over dark, it has a much more agreeable, much more you can believe. It's a much more believable approach to depicting objects. Is that background dark color and with white over the top. Working with a little bit of a smaller brush, putting in a few more of the details of the mountain, wanting to make certain that I've blocked out some of the edges, some of the valleys and creases. You might even call it a crevasse. It's a wonderful time to use this word. Crevasse is one of my favorite words. I don't know exactly why. It's got French roots, I would imagine. And a lot of French words are fun to say. So we'll keep working in a few of these valleys here. Keep identifying where that mountain is going to be kind of folding on itself. We don't want it to appear flat. These creases that we're picking up right now will help give it form, help us see that it's worn in time by the water that runs over them, by the geographic activity, the movements of the tectonic plates, all of that. You want to make sure that you're showing something that's more than just a flat mountain. You need to give it some character. We're going to block in a little bit of the darker colors here, clean up some of the edges. Doesn't have to be super clean. Notice that I am taking a very exploratory approach to this. A lot of the way that paintings begin, good paintings, is with this very rough exploratory approach. I don't want to just work from one side of the painting and slowly, progressively move from the left to the right or top to bottom, whatever it may be. It's much better for me and for many artists to start very general and work to specific. Block out all of my general ideas and then start working in. We can see already that the mountains are starting to have that three-dimensionality to them. And notice that as we get closer to the edges of any of these mountains, we want things to be really thin. We want things to have a much smaller feel to them. It's a good fundamental way to provide form to something. Keep cleaning up these edges here. Add a couple more creases. Notice that really thin line towards the edge of that mountain. That's going to help provide us the idea of three-dimensionality. Keep adding in here. Go in with an even darker tone. Provide some more form to these mountains here. You can see that there's some cracks, there's some ravines up in these mountains. We want to make sure that we collect those too, depict those. It'll be important for later on. And a lot of this stuff is going to get painted over, and that's okay. That is all right. It's going to show us a little more of a realistic approach. We don't want it to be too realistic, but I'm not trying to aim for a Cezanne depiction right off the bat. I want to first show something that is a little more realistic, and then we can talk, once we've got the base layer of this painting complete, we'll talk a little bit about how Cezanne might have even skipped a lot of these things and just gone straight into exploratory brushwork. The amount of speed, or the amount of time that it takes to do a painting in a Cezanne style impressionist painting, is typically much less than a realistic painting. However, you got to keep in mind that to get to the Cezanne level, you have to have at least some level of basic understanding in depicting realism. The ability to jump out of realism and into something that's more impressionistic requires you to understand what are the key elements of a realistic depiction of something, and then be able to stylize on that. It's a little bit like moving from classical music to jazz. You still, even with jazz, need to know how to play classical music. But once you know that, you can in jazz produce music much, much faster than you would in composing something that's like a Mozart or a Beethoven. It's required that you have, or at least beneficial that you have, the background ideas of what it takes to compose before you can start moving quickly. And I think that's another element why I love working in the impressionist style. And when I was in jazz band in high school, and when I played in a band through high school as well too, I think that's one of the reasons why I love jazz music so much, is that because of how quickly you can move in that style, you can put in your emotions much faster. You can put in a lot more of the real life feeling into something, and we're gonna benefit from that on the art side as well too. Art and music are not so different. They're all classified as art, right? And one's visual, one's audible, one's the audio version of it. And there's so much more than just that connection that exists. That connection exists between writing, between dance, between theater. There's a lot of similarities that you can make between each of those methods of expression. And I have to say too that being a hobby music producer is I notice a lot of those connections between painting and producing music. And I would imagine if I took up a little more writing, I would see some of those connections as well too. It's kind of nice after you get those base fundamentals down in one art. It's actually easier to learn a new art, to learn a new skill that's usually, a lot of people will talk about, it's got to be talent. You got to have talent to do those things. I completely disagree. I think talent does exist, but I don't refer to it the same way that a lot of people think of talent. They think of it, no, it's this inborn thing. You're born to be able to do this. No way. The amount of time that I've spent doing paintings like this, way more than what I could call talent. This is a learned skill after thousands of hours of making mistakes, of every now and then finding something that you like, and every now and then struggling. There's a lot of struggle, but there's a lot of people, if you realize and if you start to connect with other art communities that feel the same way. It's a matter of discipline. Discipline is going to be what gets you to feeling like you have talent. And then of course people will say, oh, you're so talented, and you'll know my pain at that point, where you'll say, no, it wasn't talent. I woke up every Saturday morning and Sunday morning and cranked away at this, and felt like I wasn't improving, felt like I wasn't getting any better. But you do. You totally do. It's hard to see it. It's like looking at yourself in the mirror every day. You don't see yourself age every morning. It's usually 8 months, 5 years, 10 years later down the road that you realize, oh, at that. I didn't see that wrinkle before. Or if you're younger, you'll notice, oh, man, I am taller. But you don't notice day to day. You got to trust that time equates out to skill. And in that sense, my definition of talent, that's talent, is the result of all that time that you've invested in whatever it may be. Adding in a few more of the features here for the mountain, making sure that I'm still painting with a fairly neutral brush. I don't want anything super colorful yet. The bright colors can come later. They will actually be better if there's a little bit of the neutral left behind, kind of peeking through on the edges of things. That saturated color is going to look so much more colorful if we have those neutral colors nearby. Blocking out some more of the cracks here, blocking out a few more of the tiny little peaks out in the distance, maybe a few of the rock formations out here as well too. Getting a few more of the smaller details. And if I was working on a painting, I probably would first lay down a base color for the mountains instead of working out all of the line work first. Photoshop is going to allow me to be a little more flexible. I could even get underneath everything that I'm painting right now and lay in a background color. So my activity on Photoshop versus working in like a traditional painting is going to be wildly different. And I'm actually using a mouse here. I actually am faster with the keyboard shortcuts than I am with the graphics tablet. And I honestly kind of love the feeling of gliding around on a mouse versus trying to use a pen on a stylus. Both are good. Both are fantastic, but it's a little cumbersome to have the graphics tablet in front of me and not be able to have my left hand moving fluidly over keyboard shortcuts to change color, to change the brush size, to change the opacity. It's a lot easier for me to use the mouse in that sense. And every now and then I'll get the tablet out. I do have a drawing tablet, but I do find that with my current skill set, I'm a little faster just with the mouse. And with something that's impressionistic, I'm not trying to get highly refined line work down. The mouse actually lends its capabilities a little bit better. So I'm laying in some of the green, right? Some of the grass out in the distance. Notice this is pretty grayish, neutralish green, because especially on the items that are in the distance, the components of the painting that are out in the distance, I don't want them to be really bright green. I don't want any of the colors back here to be really, really bright. And you can notice from my color selector on the right hand side, if you notice, most of my colors that I'm selecting are on the left hand side. So that's a good visual representation right there. Those are the neutral colors. That is them. The right hand side moves to saturated. So I'm bringing in a few more colors of blue here. I want there to be some variety in the sky. Don't want it all to be the same bluish color. A lot of skies and paintings, you'll notice they do have that gentle variation to them. And then if you go outside and you look at a sky, it's like a really perfect gradation from dark blue colors at the, if you look straight up, and it gets lighter as it goes down towards the horizon line. Let's look at our reference material real fast and do some comparisons. So you can see, taking creative license. This is not a one-to-one depiction of the photograph, but it is taking a lot of influence from the photograph itself. We're going to continue layering this out, noticing some of the things that I like more about the photograph. I want this mountain to actually cross over that mountain in the back. That's actually better composition for what we're trying to convey, some natural feeling here. Let's block in a few more of these greenish colors. This is a pretty saturated green, and I'm okay with that because it's hitting, the sun is hitting this side of the mountain. And notice I did go ahead and put in some more neutral colors over the top of it, but there's some nice edges of saturated colors. And if you remember from that Cezanne painting, a lot of his edges are pretty saturated. They don't have to be really dark, but there are very strong colors on those edges. And I think that is, in essence, part of that naive eye when we first open up. Before our eyes get the chance to calibrate and see what there is to see, we will pick up a lot of those really saturated colors first, and then our eyes kind of settle and everything organizes itself. Our brains kind of remap the colors out for us. Blocking in some more of the greens here. Now we're starting to get a feel. Now we're starting to feel like this is a grassy mountain. This is springtime wherever it is, or it's a beautiful part of the country, wherever it might be, and it's always green. Wouldn't that be nice? Where I live right now, as soon as it gets to about July or August, all of the greenery on the sides of the mountains dry up and go a little bit of a more dusty, yellowy kind of color, which can still be beautiful, but the lushness of a green hillside is remarkable. Everybody notices that during the springtime. Wow, look how beautiful the hills are. Notice how thin that strip of grass is that I laid there. That's on the edge, right? We don't want that to be thick. If it was thick, it would read a lot less like the edge of a cliff and a lot more like a continuation of the hill. We want it to be this thin strip. We want it to have that cliff feel. Lightening up some of the edges on the clouds here. Some edges to clouds are sharp and hard, and other edges are a lot more soft. So there's a lot of variation to a cloud. It's not all just a circular form. They're puffy on some sides and nice and hard and sharp on others. I like to explore the shape of a cloud. I don't want to be constrained just by exactly how the cloud looks, because clouds are fun to paint that way. I don't think there's any other reason than that. They're just fun to paint with a lot of variation. Laying in a little more of a saturated color, leaving the neutral edges in there. Not going to clean up the edges on that. Want it to be a nice variation. And this blue actually might be a little too blue. Might want to bring it down just a little bit. But for now, we'll go ahead and block that out. Here we go. A little bit of some dusty edges there on that cloud. Look at that. Look at those clouds starting to look a little more three-dimensional, a little more puffy. Let's grab the green from that sun-hit side of the mountain. Let's block that in on a few of the other sides of the grass that we know are going to be nice and sunlit as well too. Lots of variation. Don't want it all to be the same color, but we do want to have a little more of the saturated colors coming through now. Adjusting the edges on this. And I'm using, in Photoshop, you've got the ability to change the opacity of a brush. When I'm trying to make something look like a painting, I'll keep the opacity very near full, maybe not 100% blocked out, but I don't want it to have too much of a watercolor-like approach. A lot of digital paintings, if your opacity is too low, well, it's kind of fun to work that way. It takes on a much more digital painting-esque feel. And in this case, we really wanted to have that thick oil feel. Okay, I think I'm ready to start blocking in some smaller details here. And some striations. Keep the differences really thin towards the edge of the object. Let's work on the mountains back here just a little bit more too. There's a lot of shadow at play going on in this photograph, so I want to have some nice hard edges between the green colors and the gray colors, especially out there in the background. Really makes it feel like the light's right on the line of horizon. And the lighting in my sky doesn't do a great job of reflecting that, so we'll probably make some adjustments when we get to the Cezanne stage of this painting. This is still pretty Cezanne-esque, pretty impressionist-esque right now where we're at, but we are making some steps a little bit closer towards Courbet, you might even say, somewhere maybe a little bit more of what he was doing. But that's okay. We'll go to the Cezanne. We'll go into the future and see what Cezanne might have to influence this painting. Making some of the transitions between the light colors and the dark colors over here a little bit more even, a little bit smoother. I'm probably creating a little more work for myself than I need to in this. I could probably leave this blocked out a little bit more. Those small hard line brush strokes are very Cezanne-esque, but we're kind of eliminating some of those right now just as I work, just to kind of clean in some of the white that's showing through. Now if you close your eyes and open them again, you'll notice the painting reads differently, even if you just close your eyes for a few seconds. You've been watching the transition happen slowly, but if you close them and then open them, you can start to see this is feeling like there's space, there's depth. You could explore, you could go on a hike in these mountains, go find a wonderful trail and see what else you might find on your adventure. Let's add in a few more of the crags here. Let's add a nice dark side to some of these edges here. There we go. There we go. Hopefully this isn't too dark. I have to come back here and lighten all this up. Nice, there we go. Getting that kind of rough feel, that rough stonework there in the background. There we go. This area right down here, I think this is the focal point of the photograph and will be of the painting as well too. Yeah, that's really nice. Liking what's going on there. That bright sunshiny yellow. Let's bring a little bit of that towards the front of the painting too. So if I left that super bright back there and then the rest of my composition had a little more of a subdued color, there'd be dissonance in reading the painting. You would notice that that background is actually pushing forward more than the foreground is. We want everything that's closer to us to feel like it's closer. So I don't want that little back area back there to be the only part that has that bright green. So that's why we laid it in on the midground as well too. Let's do a little bit of color variation there. Blend out some of those hard edges. Okay. We're getting to a point where I feel like we might be ready to start on the foreground, the really close foreground. I know I described this as the foreground, but this is probably better described as the midground right here that we're working on. Let's see if we can add in a few more shadows and edges. Add a little more three-dimensionality to our subject. Bring the ravine of this out just a little bit. Okay, good. Re-express some of these lines in the mountain. Nice and thin towards the edges of them. That's naturally how a lot of those are going to form together. This is going to come down. Clean up the edges of the painting. My wife and I have been spending probably the last 3 years watching YouTube videos before bed. So I try when I record a lot of these videos to set them up in a way that this is something that you could put on as you're getting ready for bed, as you're getting ready to fall asleep. I don't want them to be too high energy. I want it to be something that helps you ease you into the next day. Give you a little something unique to do before bedtime. All right, there's some kind of white layered stones out here. Let's lay in kind of a white background for these stones. Give them some edges. And a few of the trees in front of them. And then a few more. Now we're getting a little more saturated, a little bit darker too. Be a little bit too saturated. We might need to come in here and neutralize a little bit of this, but for now let's lay in where all those tree lines are. Bottom edges of the trees. We want the tops to be nice and fluffy, but then the bottom side should have pretty tough, strong edge from a distance here. That actually might do it. We might not need to neutralize those. They're still reading a little bit neutral. When we go into the Cezanne painting, we might make an adjustment there. For now, let's keep moving. There we go. That's actually a better green. I think that reads a little less punchy. It'll advance towards the viewer a little bit less that way. Let's see if we can add in a little more highlights. green or a little less yellow. 10% that color off a little bit. So it's got a glowy feel to it. Okay, I'm ready to put in some of those lines for the rocks over here. Brush might be a little bit too hard, a little bit too sharp on its edges. We'll have to come in there and kind of soften that a little bit for the distance. Yeah, use a darker color here to kind of clean it up. It's interesting, as you're painting this, you'll make realizations about the geography, about how the trees grow. They're all growing near the base of the mountain, right, where the water would pool, where there'd be mountain streams. Plenty of great minerals running off the mountains, helping feed the flora. We've got all these ideas in our minds of what natural is and what a landscape should be. And all of it comes from, without us really even realizing, just the way the world works. Just the way that the climate and precipitation, how all of that plays with our natural surroundings. Okay, I feel like we're ready to go ahead and start working on the foreground here. So let's go ahead and start blocking out some of the trees that overlap a lot of the foreground. Yeah, we're covering up some of what we painted, but that's good. We want it. We want to have a full, complete, done midground. There's no need to block a lot of this stuff out right off the bat. You notice how that tree is kind of playing with that ravine there. I want to take some creative license to move that tree just a little bit so it's not blending in. You know, make it a little bit smaller. How about that? If we make this tree overlap that ravine but not touch the next one, right? We want it to be separate. That'll actually play just fine. And those are compositional adjustments, right? We don't need to follow the photograph exactly. Use it as reference. That's why it's called reference. It's not, I don't call it the end result or the end goal. That's not my end goal, right? Just using it as a guide. Okay, we'll start layering in what the foreground looks like here. And through here, I've talked a lot about what the basic elements, what they require to get going. So I think from here we're going to speed up the painting a bit. We'll get to a point where we're ready to start adding some of the Cezanne elements to the painting, back into the painting. So let's speed this up. Okay, slowing it back down, putting the finishing touches before we start adding in some of the Cezanne elements. We've got the houses, got kind of like a rocky crag in the mid-ground right before the houses, and I'm starting to add in a few of the Cezanne elements, putting a blue kind of glowy edge to the foreground here. Cleaning up some of those rocks. Okay, all right. A little bit dark. And there's a few bushes right there. A few nice little dark edges. There we go. Okay. Great. All right. Here we are. So I'm ready to start adding in the Cezanne-esque elements. We're going to need to make some adjustments here and add in some of the big brush strokes. I actually want to add a little more highlights here before we call this complete. We'll call this ready. We'll make this nice and bright right there. Good. Okay. Yeah, all right, so let's go ahead and move forward in time a little bit. Okay, so pick up some of that Cezanne style. Let's make sure that we've got a good brush here. It's going to work just fine. Let's pick up a few more edges here. This isn't going to be too difficult. This is all shadow over here. It should be pretty light. Some of those edges. Some real character there. Very impressed with what Adobe has to offer for its brushes. And this really feels like I'm painting into wet oil paints. I'm sure for you visually it's surprising as well too. It's fantastic to be able to work in this medium and not have to worry about getting my hands covered in paint, having to wash up with soap at the end or anything. It's easy, much easier. Okay, that's pretty close on this hillside. I'm pretty happy with that. The rest of the greens in here, I really think that these are too neutral. So we're gonna open up our color batch again here, and then we're gonna switch this. Let's go to palette. The one that I like. Let's CMYK. Not RGB. Use this the grayscale slider. There we go. So hue Q, color Q. And we can see with these, it's a little darker and a little more neutral than I'd like. Let's go in here, lighten some of this up. Neutralize it a little bit too. tiny brush here to do this. Lots of individual small brush strokes. This is just a little bit wider than I'd like to, so let's grab that. There we go. And I think since this is so far out in the distance too, it is in our best interest to think about how the reflection of the blue sky adds a bluish hue to a lot of this. So instead of just going straight green, we're going to move the slider up to blue, like a greenish blue right on the edge of cyan. And we're going to bring these colors in. You're going to notice that it'll fade into the distance a little bit more. We might need to go just a little bit lighter. Let's back up from this and take a look at it. Certainly added more interest to it. Maybe I don't like it as much. Let's go a little more green. Let's pick a nice midpoint and bring in just a little more saturation. It's a pretty greenish gray. And I've got a color blindness. I've got a red-green color blindness, so anytime I'm playing around with greens, it's a little bit more difficult for me to be able to identify how it's going to look to other people. That's all right. That's okay. And still kind of get the idea of what is important for the viewer off of a value side, but the colors are going to look significantly different for you. And all that means is that my eyes have trouble distinguishing between the green and red hues. So even though that probably looks like a nice green to you, it's pretty difficult for me to identify that that's a good strong green between a green and a gray. And then the same thing happens with red. If it's the same value or if it's getting close to that neutral side, it makes it a little more challenging, and that's okay. It's all right. So let's do a few more of these small brush strokes back in here. That might be too small. Let's go a little bit bigger. I've got my keyboard set up so that my left hand can stay almost entirely on the left side on my keyboard and never have the need to go to the right. So right hand's on the mouse, left hand is hanging out over the top of the spacebar control. I've got some macro keys that I've assigned out to common Photoshop key bindings, such as the left bracket and right bracket. Instead of having to reach my hand over to the right hand, kind of the middle side of the keyboard, I can just keep it right over here. Change the brush size. Makes it feel very intuitive. It feels intuitive, but it comes from using it quite a bit. Add in some lighter greens in here. Okay, this component right in here is feeling much more impressionistic, much more like Cezanne. So I'm going to say that everything that's happening in this area needs to be applied to the rest of the painting. So I've got generic color values built out for the rest of the painting. I'm happy with this left-hand side. I need to work on this section, the mountains, and the clouds as well too. So let's work a little bit on the mountains here. This doesn't need to be a ton. Right? We don't want to disrupt too much of what we got going on. And I did like how soft these are, but a little bit of hard edges is not gonna take away too much from it. This side of the mountain, I'd love to see some of this light. There we go. It's a little bit better. And even far back here, we might need to neutralize this. But we should have some indication of light on these back mountains too. Notice that's a pretty nice blue distance color there. I'm good with that. And slightly soften this. Don't want it as soft as the clouds, but I do want it softer than the other mountains nearby. Might be a little variation here. I'm not actually looking at the photo anymore at this point, which is really fun because now I'm making those decisions completely off of my own creative license of knowing from the classical studies that I've done on art what it is that it would take to give the idea correctly of the mountains, but not necessarily having to rely on replicating out what was originally in the photo. The rest of these edges here, I'm probably going to use an eraser instead because I don't want to have... There we go. Let's make sure we're working on the right layer. Oh, we haven't separated out the layers anymore. That's why. Okay, never mind. We're not going to worry about using an eraser. We're just treating this like a traditional painting. There's no ability for me to erase things right now. I'm just going to have to engage with these edges. There we go. Looks good. Good with that. Still like these subtle soft edges on there. That's good. And let's see. Let's take a break on this and let's come back over here to this section. Let's see, we need to have some darker colors. This sun's hitting just fine in here, but there's going to be more pronounced shadows up against the trees and the rest of the foliage that's around in here. So that was that. Let's go here and let's go blue. Or at least, there we go. Right there. Yeah, there we go. Very nice. And then we'll step up a little bit lighter. There, it's got a little more texture to it. That's nice. Okay. That is complete, right? I'm not going to have to worry about anything else on that. There was a little bit of white from the canvas showing through in that area that looked like a cloud kind of coming through the mountains. I might play around with that idea. That's not a bad concept to have in there. These mountains are high enough up that they would have some clouds. clouds rolling through. Very nice. about the foreground last. Let's go ahead and work on the clouds a bit more in the sky too. So this is a nice bright blue. Let's add a little variation in here. Way too neutral. There we go. Still a bit too neutral. Keeping in mind, as the skyline goes up, the colors often get a bit darker. As we go down, they're lighter. This cloud is so on its own. It needs, I mean, it's too circular as well too. It's going to read too much. It's like a circle. So we need to make some adjustments there. Let's bring out some of these grayish colors. That's really fantastic. That gray reads so warm in this local area, but we know from the color slider that it is a cool gray. So interesting optical effect going on. Let's see if we can bring in just a little more blue. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. And I think we're going to bring this back up and engage with confidence on this edge right here. We don't want to shy away from edges. Go right into them. Do not have any hesitation. See, I'm painting over here with the same color, but look how different these two. This is the same color right here that it is here, but just because it gets right up against white, changes significantly. Okay, that's better. Still not completely happy with it, but I can't keep noodling this. I need to move on to something else and come back. And so I go back to it anyways. Oh, it's tough. Okay, let's make some big adjustments over here. at that effect. What's going on there? A little underlight to the clouds. That's got a good feeling to it. It's not fully expressed yet, but there's something there. Okay, this is a really, really grayish blue. I mean, we can keep it dark, but let's do a little bit of this. Change it up a little bit. Okay, good. Okay, grab some pure white. Okay, something's happening there. We'll come back to it. Grab a little more pure white over here. Maybe two pure white. Okay, happy with these clouds. These clouds are making me feel good, making me feel right. So let's add in just a little more of the light color between the mountains here. Make sure that's all consistent. Blend it out. Okay, and then all these clouds need just a little bit of blending. Okay. Much happier with the clouds and with the sky. That feels right. This area down here needs just a little more love, it looks like. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the outlines and the edges of some of these mountains here in the background. The Cezanne approach is going to have some of those more saturated colors around the edges. We want that. We want there to be a nice, good distinction. So let's play around with this. Keep it pretty loose. I'm hesitant. I like the way they looked before. Let's just reduce the size of the brush. Reduce the speed of my mouse. There we go. Okay. Better. And now we want to go a little bit darker blue in here. Okay, all right. Last but not least, the foreground. Let's work on this. So we've got really dark, deep greens in here, and not a lot of variation. So I want to add in, let's bring these trees back up. Too repetitious, right? So this being lower actually was helpful. Let's, now it's 1, 2, drop, and then 4. Similar to music, you can't have the same thing repeating. And I did it again. Let's have another drop there, so that was actually better off lower. And then the green is nice and saturated-ish, but we need some flavor in here. We need some lighter colors. Right? I know this isn't the dark area, so we can't go too light, but we can certainly go lighter than what we had. Break some of this up. This element here, pretty flat, one color. Let's see if we can bring in something a bit more saturated. It's yellow, let's go green. Nope. Go. It's better. starting to break from unity of the rest of the painting, right? It's starting to, this might have been a little bit too intense. So let's try to come back in here and work with it. Form-wise, we've got this side of the painting that's got some breaks in value. We've got darker on this side, but light on this side. We should still have light over here, and we should have some more darks as well too. So let's grab this. Okay, what's going on with these bushes over here? We want to have applied out to the rest of these trees. So we've got just a nice thin strip of a good saturated green at the top. In between those, we don't need it to be super in your face, but there we go. Look at that. A little bit of a bluish green. It's a medium point. It's going to help tie together some of the other blue outlines that we did. So in the shadows down here. This block of green right here needs some help. I need to do something with that. All right. Okay, I'm feeling much better about this. So, the hard transitions here are good. We want that to have the punch here in the foreground, and out here in the background. Let's make sure that we're not leaving these behind either. Let's do some nice line work out here. Here we go. Okay. All right. Okay. Last piece. This one right here. And then we're going to call it done. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we did. And we'll do some side-by-side comparisons as well, too. There. That's better. What we have going on there is actually pretty good. I want to see if we can get some more of those hard edges around here in these homes. Okay, so the palette that we have, especially because it's on the computer, it has almost a neon effect here in the foreground. That's not going to be something that we would have been able to pick up with. Well, so they probably would have been able to do this in the 20th century, but that's not typical of what we would see. So I want to subdue this just a tiny bit without having to go through and spend a ton of extra time layering in extra colors. To make that happen, we're going to switch our brush and change it to something that's going to have like this impressionist blender actually might come in handy for this. And there should be under the brush settings, we should be able to change its, oh, you know what, it's right up here in the top. Let's change its strength down to like a 14. And perfect. It's going to kind of make this a little bit misty, a little bit smudgy. That'll be exactly what we need to bring it down just a little bit in excitement. We don't want to do it to everything. We do want to leave some of those edges in there nice and hard. So yeah, the tool makes quick work of this, right? But it takes time to realize where all these tools are at, and it takes time to lots of practice and lots of adjustments to realize that that's what the piece needed, was something like that. This line that we've got going on here with the blue, I kind of want to go back to the brush we had and just do a good extra couple lines right there. Let's look at our color. Let's make it a little bit saturated. Right. Okay. And then we'll go back to our blender, touch it up just a bit. It's going to go back to high strength. Let's really bring the strength down because we don't want to disrupt too much of it. Wonderful. Okay. Like to sign my work. To make sure I do it in a place that's not going to take away from the rest of the painting. So we'll probably do it right in here. And we'll grab just a little bit of the screen. C for Chris. Blend it into a Z for Zeller. This is 2020. So usually it's just been 2 digits. So we'll do 2 and 0. We want it subtle. We don't want our eyes to go to that place. If you just look straight at this painting, you're not going to notice it unless you've looked in the lower right-hand corner, and then you would see it. And that's that. So let's take a peek at some more Cezanne paintings and talk about similarities and differences. And let's see here. Cezanne. Okay, yeah, let's look through a few more of his paintings here. All right, so with a regular brush, you're going to have the ability to get these nice expressive edges. A little more difficult with Photoshop. Let's look back at our painting real fast here. Let's actually find, there we go, something like that, right? So you'll notice, you can see, I mean, he is attacking the canvas. This is a full-on assault, brush in hand, loaded paint, and working diligently on the canvas. And let's compare back to what we have over here. So if we zoomed in, we would see we've got some of those expressions happening with some of these edges in here and some of these back and forth. The brush I'm using is what's distinguishing between this and that, right? I mean, a traditional brush, you're going to have much more control over getting the indications, the indicated marks. Notice too that his brush strokes are fairly linear in this piece. They're not like that in every single one of his landscape. This one's probably a little bit better for us to see that on. So we can see that some of these brush strokes are a little more akin to what we've got going on there. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the journey that we took, realizing where Cezanne comes from, his impact that he had on Picasso, and all of his mentors and teachers that he had that helped him get to him to his space. This is why I love Cezanne. You get works like this, the rest of his works. I think we see enough of what the world looks like. It's wonderful to have a stylized approach to what a artist can indicate on real life material versus how we actually see things. Please feel welcome to leave some comments. Looking forward to having you around for whatever the next video might be. It might be more music. It might be something a little more focused on the production of music. Who knows? I'm going through an exploratory stage with my channel and wanting to show and have all sorts of different things that we can look at together. Take care. Bye-bye.